Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for taking some time and some coffee to come and listen to my story. And as Amal said, I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning, or Learning Innovation at the American School in Japan. I'm an Australian at the American School, which is an interesting connection. But I've been there for about 6 years, and prior to that working in Australia in government education as well as teacher education and university sector. What I'd like to talk about today is the journey we went on using design thinking as a tool and a methodology to help develop particular mindsets in students, but also to help develop and encourage particular processes and mindsets with teachers and in organisational change. And one of the things, if you know anything about the American school, is it's a school that's had a very long past, a long history. 114 years old, has lived through some pretty interesting times in Japan, closing during the war for about 6 years, being run out of a house in downtown Meguro, and now sort of living in two campuses, part in the Roppongi, the very elite sort of nightclub district, I suppose you could call it, as well as the semi-rural Chofu, about 14 kilometers west of Tokyo itself. But with that past comes some interesting stories, and one of them was the day that I signed my contract to go and work there was the 11th of March, the 3/11, the day that the magnitude 9 earthquake rocked off the coast of Japan. And I wasn't sure whether I'd still be going to this job at that point in time. But what it actually did was created quite an interesting point in time for a school and a country, actually, to think about its future. And for us as a school, what it meant was almost 300 of our students walked out the door on that day, which had also been followed, not too recently, by the global financial crisis, which also saw a huge reduction in numbers in our school. And with that, as you all know, reduction in numbers means reduction in teachers, means reduction in programs, and painted a fairly interesting future for the school, which was very difficult for a school that had been around for so long. So with that in mind, we started thinking about what in heavens were we going to do? What was the thing that we could do to actually ensure that the school had a strong future? And we decided to focus on two things. One was on sustainability, how we're going to build the school back to be a sustainable organisation. And the second was how we're going to develop programs that would help us emphasise the importance of people attending this school and choosing this school. So we kind of stumbled upon design thinking because one of the things we talked about was how do we move from a very traditional American college preparatory curriculum to something that's more globally responsible and globally aware. And we started talking to a lot of people around the world around the work that they were doing. And at the time, not many people were talking about design thinking, but if you Google it now and look at the number of images of design thinking diagrams like that, you'll find thousands of them. And so it's become a real mantra. So I don't want to delve too much into the actual process of design thinking because I think many people already know quite a bit about that. But what I would like to talk about is how design thinking was a trigger for us to think differently about how we work. And I want to talk a little bit about how it helped us develop some interesting programs and, in a sense, redesigning what we're calling our end game. So the people that we started talking with were those people that have been writing in this area, people like David Kelly, who'd been working in IDEO for a while. Design thinking's been around for 30 years. This is not something that was new, but it was something that people had been dabbling with in terms of building particular mindsets and approaches to problem finding. We talked to Tony Wagner, and as a staff, we all read his book, Creating Innovators. And we talked to Heidi Hayes-Jacobs, who was a Curriculum 21 person, and she'd done a lot of work about thinking about what was the relevant curriculum for the 21st century. And of course, many of you know Ken Robinson's work in promoting the idea of creativity. And we also talked to guys like Joey Ito, who's an alum of our school from the MIT Media Lab. And all of these people helped us think differently about what we're doing and started helping us to challenge what we were doing. And we ended up talking to the guy in the top right of that slide, Ewan McIntosh from Notosh, a Scottish company based in Edinburgh, who helped us for a couple of years work around using design thinking as a tool to shift our mindsets. We also looked at a number of schools around the world that were engaged in this work. We looked at Nueva in California. We looked at the D-Lab. We talked to consultants from those places. We sent people to the Nueva School in California to do some of their workshops over summer. And many people were engaging with design thinking, but no one was looking at it as a change process or a mechanism to help the school overall think differently about what they were doing. Many people were using it as a tool in a design lab to solve a human problem, which is in a sense what design thinking is, but we were looking at it more globally in terms of what our whole school was trying to achieve. And we started talking to IDEO and NOTOSH, and they started helping us to use these strategies to start thinking about our school dilemma as if we were designers, as if we were actually approaching a problem with a human need and attempting to use this process to actually try and address what the problem was. Thinking about Kotter's change management processes, he talks about one of the first things in change is to actually create a compelling case, create a reason. And we talked about it as perturbing our thinking. Let's disrupt how we think about who we are, because if we kept thinking about ourselves as a school that was very successful for 114 years and continues to be, and to this day we still get students into colleges, top colleges all around the world, if we keep thinking that way, we're actually going to fall off our perch at some point. So it was important that we actually engaged in quite a bit of reading, and all of those books, the likes of Tony Wagner, The Global Achievement Gap, Creating Innovators, David Perkins, Making Learning Whole, and Guy Claxton, What's the Point of Schooling, were all really important readings for our faculty to help them understand the future that was in front of them. So as we started thinking about organizational change, these were the kinds of things that started coming up, that design thinking was helping us be better at inquiry. It was helping us understand our user, our students and our parents and our teachers. It was a human-centered approach. We were getting better at immersion in the user experience, really understanding what was happening for students and really understanding what was happening for parents. We were able to start holding things lightly rather than designing things and implementing them and standing on our guns and saying, we've implemented this new process and that's the way we do it now. We stopped doing things that way. We started doing meetings in a different way. Rather than having a meeting agenda, we'd actually come up with some big ideas that the meeting was attempting to accomplish. We started disrupting some of those traditional models of committees. We stopped creating committees and built coalitions of people who were willing to do that rather than assigning 6 people from 3 divisions to actually try and come together and understand and solve the problem. So it helped us in thinking differently about a lot of our processes and how we do business. So this is a little bit about how we applied it. One of the first processes we went through was actually a fairly rapid, and call it a rapid prototype if you like, but a 6-week strategic planning process. And I don't know if you've been through strategic planning or accreditation processes before, but invariably they go on forever. And invariably that kills them. And we found in a rapid prototype approach, doing our strategic plan in 6 weeks created a pressure cooker to actually come up with something really interesting. So we worked with about 65 people, staff, board members, parents, and students. And I think the thing that really struck me about this, and this is the thing I think we don't do well enough in many of our schools, is engage the student voice. The student voice out of all of those was only 4 students, but it was the most powerful voice out of all those 65 people. And understanding that, developing empathy for those kids was really quite profound. One of the kids said, in one of the conversations, he said, look, we're an AP school, we get that we have to get these APs to go to colleges. And you know what, we can do that really easily. We can study for an AP test, we can get a 5 on the test, we can forget it in 3 months. We can do that. But seriously, is that the best we can do? And when we're asked those kinds of questions, we sort of felt that, we've been providing this thing for these students all these years. What is it that we could do on top of that? Which led us to the question, how do we add value to what we already do to create a more open-ended, inspiring, passion-driven, student-centered approach to our program. And that was our challenge. These are some of our
Right off the
students.
bat, we realized like we're part of the conversation and a big part of the conversation.
I think the work that the faculty have done leading up to now with their readings and their study has made it the ripe time for us to do it. And I think that's just as important as having the ideas. It's seizing the opportunity when it is available. And to me, it seems like that's now.
My hope for ASIJ for the future is that continuing with the academic rigor we have, but allowing, my children are in 2nd and 4th grade now, and knowing that when they're a senior and graduating, they may have really pursued a passion of theirs.
An emphasis change that we need to do. Not a change in the school's atmosphere or beliefs, but a change in the emphasis. And the students change, and the teachers change, and technology changes, and you have to adapt to different times.
I'm excited, I guess, to come back in 5-6 years after I graduate college and be like, oh, well, this is what, that whole risk thing turned out to be. But at the moment, I guess it's a risk we have to take.
So inspiring for us to be given that mandate from students to take some risks with their education and create something that was more pertinent for them. So part of the process that we went through in that strategic planning was coming up with these 3 strategic objectives that weren't about what schools, how to run schools. It was about what we wanted to see students doing. And I won't read them for you, but I'll summarize them just with this one slide. It's these key words, and many of your schools will all have these key words. Somewhere in your documentation, somewhere in your mission statement, you'll have these kinds of words, and we've been talking about them all day today. What we're trying to do is say, how are we actually delivering on these? And design thinking is one strategy to help us do that. How are we delivering on them? How are we measuring these things? And I think that's the point. That if these are the things that students need for the future, we actually have to be honest and say, well, how are we actually honouring that and measuring those things? So as you think about that, think about your own school, your own context. Are you clear about what it is the end game for your school? Because we found that we weren't. We weren't very clear at all. Think about that for your own context. So for us in this process over the last 4 years, what's changed? One of the things we've started to see is people prototyping, teachers prototyping with ideas around new courses and working more lightly, being prepared to actually take a risk with something, try it, and know that as a leadership team, we will support them in doing that. So working lightly is a challenge for teachers because many people feel that their preparation is the thing that they ride on and they're going to do it because that's the way it worked for them last time. We're finding our teachers, with that permission, are becoming a lot more creative themselves in the way they're willing to approach things and in the ideas that they come up in terms of challenging their students. We're seeing many more opportunities for students to demonstrate that critical thinking and many more hands-on ways of that happening, especially considering we've incorporated other elements like design technology into all grade levels throughout the school. Many of you, all of us, engaging in the maker revolution, building these spaces and creating them. Those design spaces are sort of, the lab centres for students to practice this design thinking work, if you like. But we're also seeing the same thing happen with our classroom spaces. We're trying to create these blank canvases with mobile, flexible, agile furniture, writable walls, short throw projectors, those sorts of things to actually create these spaces that are much more versatile. One of the things we also found is that we often do in schools things that we think we're trying to engage students, but we're actually doing the opposite. And we'll bring in someone to our school who's like maybe an alumni or a high flyer, and we're supposed to inspire our students. And we've had many opportunities like that with Condoleezza Rice coming to our school, George Bush coming to our school, doing far less than inspiring people because our students don't have agency to connect with those people. But they do actually have agency to connect with people who are like them, kids who've had their big ideas when they were at school. And some of the entrepreneurs we've been getting are kids that actually started their ideas when they were 13 and 14 years old, kids that have created companies when they're in grade 4. We're also looking at promoting these models of inspiration where we're looking at teachers who maybe not actually be teachers, You know, our alumni, like the Mars rover guy, who's one of our alum of our school, Kaz Hirai from Sony, talks about the failures of Sony in the Japanese culture. We've just hired an astronaut, Dan Tani, a retired Japanese astronaut, to come and work with us, not a teacher, but working with us in synthetic biology and bioengineering. So we're actually starting to challenge the boundaries of who are the right people to come and teach our kids, given that the world is changing so much. Think about artificial intelligence, virtual reality, those sort of areas. Who's going to help us get to that level of understanding? And our culminating program now is our impact program, where our students are to make a dent on the universe. And it's not about being something that I start here and I finish here. It's actually something that the students design and drive themselves. And it's really, you know, very similar, I suppose, to other programs that schools have, like, you know, extended essay. But we're asking students to actually use this tool to demonstrate their progress towards our strategic objectives, those big key words that I mentioned previously. To help us do that, we've actually built these, what we're calling building blocks. And these building blocks are either new courses or re-engineered existing courses that help students put together their own journey towards this impact program. So you'll see by nature of those, if I'm a Japanese student and I want to do something around entrepreneurship, I can combine these courses together with an independent inquiry to create a pathway for myself that allows me to do something that I'm interested in and passionate about, and I'm actually getting credit for it because it's part of my curriculum. One of the things that always intrigues me is that when you talk to kids, many of the things that they remember about school are never part of the curriculum, and that's what we need to change. One of the other things we created, and this comes back to my introduction around creativity, is we actually created a new virtual faculty called Creativity, Innovation and Design. And rather than saying this is a whole new thing, we actually looked at ways of re-engineering existing courses to actually meet some criteria around this. For example, using design thinking, having a user in mind, creating a product or a system that actually responded to a human need. And we're now getting a raft of those kinds of courses filling in there, and we've actually made that a graduation requirement. So the changes we've seen from a school that was like this when I came, we had advanced placement courses and electives, to a school that now has these building blocks to something that's really quite different for our student, is kind of the journey of where design thinking took us. To think about our user at the end of the day, the student in our school, what's the end game that we're preparing them for, and how can we ensure that we're building and designing a program that is student-centered, student-driven, passion-driven, and that we're actually giving students credit for the work that they're doing because it's part of their curriculum. I'm happy to take questions, but I'd like you to think about that. Is there something in your school that design thinking could remedy? And happy to talk about it in a break or whatever afterwards. Thank you.